My name is Eleanor, but everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 30, and I was just about to head out for Sunday dinner at my parents' house, pulling on my coat, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo, my attorney. Just 2 words: call me. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number, and the news he gave me sent a chill straight to my core, feeling like ice water was flooding my veins. My parents, the 2 people I trusted more than anyone on earth, were the focus of a major fraud investigation. The $60,000 I was about to give them that night to invest in their business? It would have disappeared, and so would they. I collapsed onto my couch, the room spinning around me, the sharp, bitter taste of betrayal filling my mouth. If you're watching this somewhere your family can't see your screen, go ahead and hit subscribe, and let me know where you're hiding out while I tell you the story of how my entire world was shattered by a single phone call. About 6 months ago, I moved back to my hometown of Denver, still reeling from my divorce from Mark. A decade of marriage had been boiled down to a stack of legal documents and a cold splitting of our assets. The experience left me emotionally gutted, but thankfully I was financially stable. My ex-husband might have thrown away our life together for his 23-year-old assistant, but at the very least, our divorce settlement had been fair. I used my share to buy a small, charming townhouse near the city center and threw myself back into my career as a marketing executive for a local tech company. Starting over at 30 was never in my life plan, but having my parents nearby made the chaotic transition feel somewhat manageable. My parents, Catherine and David, were what you would call pillars of the community. My father, David, had spent years building a flawless reputation as a financial advisor, helping local families plan for secure retirements and save for their kids' college funds. His downtown office was a monument to his success, its walls lined with certificates and awards for excellence in financial planning. My mother, Catherine, was just as admired. She was a top-tier real estate agent selling high-end homes to Denver's professional elite, and she served on the boards of 3 different local charities. They were in their regular pew at church every Sunday, threw the best neighborhood barbecues, and never passed up an opportunity to boast about their successful daughter in marketing. When Mark left me, they became my fortress. Mom came over and stayed with me for 2 straight weeks, a quiet force of nature who filled my home with comfort food and helped me sort through the artifacts of a 10-year marriage. Dad took charge of the practical matters, handling the endless phone calls with the mortgage company, insurance agents, and credit card companies. They were the safety net I never realized I would need, catching me just as my life was falling apart. Family is all that really matters in the end, Dad would often say, his hand resting with a comforting weight on my shoulder as I cried over old photo albums. Blood is thicker than water, Ellie. We will always, always be here for you. Leo Vance had come into my life as my divorce lawyer, recommended by a friend from college. He was all business, brutally direct, but he possessed a surprising depth of empathy. He guided me through the legal maze, always fiercely protecting my interests. After the divorce was finalized, I kept him on retainer to handle the purchase of my new home. He was invaluable, spotting issues in the contracts that I would have completely overlooked, and negotiating terms that were strongly in my favor. We developed a friendly professional relationship, occasionally grabbing coffee to go over my long-term financial strategy. Then 2 months ago, my parents invited me over for a special dinner. That night, they revealed their grand new venture, a luxury vacation rental business in the mountain towns of Colorado. Mountain View Estates, they had named it. They claimed to have already acquired 2 properties and were in the process of closing on 4 more. We've been planning this for years, honey, Mom explained, her eyes sparkling as she passed me glossy photos of breathtaking modern houses with panoramic mountain views. The return on investment is just phenomenal, and we've already booked the existing properties solid through the entire summer. Dad spread spreadsheets across their polished dining room table, pointing to columns of projected income and impressive growth charts. We're offering this opportunity to a very exclusive group of family members and our closest friends, he said. The initial investors will receive priority profit distribution for the first 5 years. They suggested I invest my divorce settlement, the $60,000 I had been so protective of. The timing felt like fate. I was in the middle of rebuilding my life from the ground up, and this felt like a chance to build a new financial foundation, one that could provide a steady income and secure my future. And the best part? I would be in business with my parents. I could trust the operation completely. "Just think about it," Mom said, squeezing my hand with a warm, reassuring grip. "This could be your fresh start, too." In the weeks that followed, they continued to feed me more exciting details. They had a property manager, a man named Thomas, whom they introduced me to over a video call. The connection was poor, and the video kept lagging, so I never got a good look at him. But every conversation I had only reinforced my confidence in their business acumen. Tonight was supposed to be the night. The celebratory dinner at their house where I would sign the paperwork and officially become a partner in the family business. I had the cashier's check tucked securely in my purse, ready to invest in my future. And then Leo's text came. "Ellie, I stumbled onto something deeply concerning while running property checks for another client," he explained grimly when I called him back. "Your parents' names came up in a series of fraud lawsuits across 3 different counties." He let that information sink in. I did some digging, and there's a pattern, going back years. Different business names, but the schemes are all disturbingly similar. My stomach dropped as he continued. "There are allegations of Ponzi schemes, fraudulent investment opportunities, and a massive misappropriation of funds. The most recent case was filed just last month by a retired schoolteacher. She invested her entire pension in a guaranteed return property venture that never actually existed. There has to be some kind of mistake," I insisted, my voice rising with panic. "My parents are respected members of the community. My dad has managed people's investments for decades. That's exactly how they build trust," Leo replied, his tone gentle but firm. "But according to the court records, they've settled multiple cases out of court, moved between states, and operated under a whole host of different business names. Ellie, something is not right with their finances. Those properties they showed you? I checked the county records. They don't own them." My mind rebelled against his words. It was impossible. My parents, the people who taught me the importance of honesty and integrity, could not be con artists. The idea was unthinkable. "The dinner tonight," Leo pressed on, "is it about that investment opportunity they offered you?" "Yes," I whispered, the cashier's check in my purse suddenly feeling like it was made of lead. $60,000. Do not sign a single thing," he urged, his voice sharp with a clear warning. "Don't give them a cent. I need more time to investigate, but Ellie, I'm seriously concerned they're planning to disappear with investors' money. And soon." After I hung up with Leo, I just sat there on my couch, completely frozen, his words echoing in the sudden, deafening silence of my townhouse. Could my loving, supportive parents really be criminals? The same parents who once made me return a $5 bill when a cashier accidentally gave me too much change? The ones who lectured me that honesty was the very foundation of a person's character? While we were on the phone, Leo had emailed me the court documents. With trembling fingers, I opened the files on my phone. Lawsuits filed in Colorado, Arizona, and Nevada. All of them named Catherine and David Peterson, my parents, as defendants in cases of fraud. One complaint detailed, in excruciating detail, how they had convinced a retired couple to pour their life savings into a non-existent restaurant franchise. Another described an exclusive investment group for luxury condos that were never built. Then a plaintiff's name leaped out at me, a sickening jolt of recognition: the Millers. They had moved away so suddenly when I was in high school, the Clarks, who had been such close family friends until a mysterious, unspoken falling out. Mrs. Gable, my old piano teacher, who stopped speaking to my parents entirely after investing in one of Dad's special opportunities. Small, jagged inconsistencies from my past suddenly began to click together, forming a horrifying picture. Our family had moved 3 times during my childhood. It was always, according to my parents, to pursue better opportunities. But each move was abrupt, often happening in the middle of a school year, forcing me to leave friends and a life I knew behind. I remembered how secretive they always were about their business affairs. If I brought friends home, all financial talk would immediately cease. Dad's home office door was always locked. Mom would deflect any questions about their investments with vague talk of diverse portfolios and private client matters. They actively discouraged me from forming deep friendships, always emphasizing family loyalty above everything else. "Friends come and go, Ellie, but family is forever," Mom would say whenever I cried about leaving another best friend behind. Trust is earned through blood. Even more unsettling was their reaction to my college boyfriend, James, who was studying finance. When he tried to ask my dad professional questions, looking for mentorship, my father became unusually defensive and cold. Their opposition to our relationship grew until we eventually broke up. At the time, I just thought it was normal parental overprotectiveness. Now it looked like something else entirely. Despite Leo's dire warning, I decided I had to go to the dinner. I had to see them for myself, to watch their behavior with this new, terrible awareness. I wouldn't confront them, not yet. I would just watch and listen, with my eyes wide open. When I pulled up to their elegant colonial home in the suburbs, I started noticing things I'd previously overlooked. The brand new Mercedes in the driveway, Mom's diamond earrings, which seemed much larger than the pair she used to wear, the original paintings on the walls that had replaced the department store prints. "Ellie, darling." Mom greeted me with a hug, her expensive perfume enveloping me. "We've been counting the minutes. This is such a thrilling night for our family." Dad hugged me next, his gold watch gleaming under the entryway light. "The start of a beautiful partnership," he declared, leading me into the living room where champagne and appetizers were already waiting. On the surface, everything was perfect. The table was meticulously set. The scent of Mom's famous pot roast wafted from the kitchen. Their smiles were as warm as ever. But I could see the cracks now. Dad's phone buzzed incessantly, causing him to step outside for hushed, urgent conversations. Mom kept checking the time, repeatedly mentioning that we should get the paperwork part done early so we could relax and enjoy dinner. "We have all the documents ready to go," she said, gesturing to a thick folder on the coffee table. "Just a few simple signatures, and you'll officially be a part of Mountain View Estates." I picked up the folder, my hand surprisingly steady. I flipped through the first few pages and noticed unfamiliar names listed as business partners: Samuel Richardson, Victoria Hamilton, Edward Montgomery. None of them had ever been mentioned before. "Who are these partners?" I asked, keeping my tone as casual as I could. "Oh, just legal entities for tax purposes," Dad replied, a little too quickly. "Nothing you need to worry about." Mom refilled my champagne glass. "The important thing is that your investment is fully secured against the properties, guaranteed returns starting next quarter." As they continued to talk about the business, their story started to unravel. Last week, they'd said there were 4 new properties under contract. Tonight, it was 6. Previously, they had said profit distributions would start after 6 months. Now they were promising immediate returns. The business address they'd given me had changed from Aspen to Vail. "We should really get these papers signed before dinner gets cold," Mom insisted, uncapping a fancy pen. "The notary charged us extra for a Sunday visit, so we should make it worthwhile." The intense pressure to sign right away, combined with their constantly shifting details, confirmed my deepest fears. Something was profoundly wrong. But a small, desperate part of me still clung to the hope that there was an innocent explanation, a misunderstanding, or a legal complication they were just too embarrassed to admit. That last flicker of hope died when I excused myself to use the restroom. As I walked down the hall, I saw Dad's briefcase, left partially open. Sticking out was a folder. Inside, I could clearly see 2 plane tickets to Costa Rica. The departure date was this Tuesday, just 2 days from now. My parents hadn't said a word about any upcoming trip. My heart pounded against my ribs as I made my way back to the living room. They were waiting for me with expectant smiles, holding out a contract that was designed to steal my financial security, and worse, to shatter the very foundation of trust that had defined my entire life. "Before we sign anything, I'd love to see those updated projections you mentioned last week," I said, forcing a smile. I was just buying time. The cashier's check was still in my purse, and I had no intention of it ever leaving. Dad's expression flickered with a hint of impatience. "We can go through all that after we get the paperwork done. The important thing is to lock in your position before the last few slots fill up. We already have 3 other investors on a wait list. If you need more time," Mom added, a strange sharpness in her voice. "The Richardsons called yesterday practically begging to increase their stake. Their pressure tactics were so transparent now that Leo had pulled back the curtain. I excused myself again, pretending I had to take a call from work. Instead of going outside, I slipped into Dad's home office, a room that had always been strictly off-limits during family gatherings. The door was unlocked, which was rare. The office itself looked perfectly legitimate, with its leather-bound planners and neatly organized files. But then my eyes were drawn to the southern wall. It was covered in a large corkboard, pinned with travel brochures for Belize, Panama, and Argentina, all countries that had no extradition treaties with the United States. My hand started to shake as I quietly pulled open the top desk drawer. Inside was a folder labeled MVE Investors. It was filled with spreadsheets listing names, investment amounts, and contact information. The total came to over $3 million, with contributions dating back nearly 2 years. I recognized so many of the names: old family friends, members of their church, elderly neighbors, so trusting people who looked up to my parents. In another drawer, I found a locked metal box. The key was hidden under the desk blotter. Dad always used the same hiding spots. I turned the key. Inside were 4 passports. 2 had my parents' photos, but with different names: Robert and Elizabeth Carson. The other 2 had their photos with the names James and Margaret Wilson. There were also multiple driver's licenses and credit cards to match each of these false identities. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as a flood of disjointed memories rushed back. Me, at age 8, moving from Seattle overnight after Dad's business partner supposedly embezzled all their money. Me, at 13, changing schools mid-year because Mom had found better educational opportunities in a different district. And me, at 17, hearing about the unexplained fire at Dad's office that destroyed all his financial records just before a scheduled audit. The most damning piece of evidence, though, was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It seemed to contain their exit strategies. There were lists of assets to liquidate, accounts to close, and a detailed timeline for disappearing. My name was on the very last page, next to a chilling note: 60,000 secured. Close loop after transfer. I wasn't just another victim on their list. I was the final score, their last con before they vanished for good. I heard footsteps approaching the office. I scrambled to put everything back exactly as I had found it and was pretending to be wrapping up my fake phone call when Mom appeared in the doorway. "Dinner's getting cold, sweetie," she said, though her eyes darted around the office, a flicker of suspicion in them. "Everything okay? Just a work emergency," I lied, noting with a sick feeling how easily the deception now came to me. "Let me just wash up and I'll be right there." At the dinner table, my parents chattered away about their upcoming business trip next week, a scouting mission for new properties, they claimed. There was no mention of Costa Rica or one-way tickets. "We'll be managing your investment remotely for a few weeks," Dad explained between bites of pot roast. "Thomas will handle all the day-to-day operations while we secure the new acquisitions. The timing is just perfect," Mom added with a bright smile. "With your money, we can close on that new Vail property immediately." Every word they said now had a sinister double meaning. Every smile seemed calculated, every gesture part of a well-rehearsed performance. These people weren't the parents who had raised me. Or maybe they were, and I had just never truly known them at all. "When do I get to meet the other investors?" I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. Perhaps we could all have a group meeting before you leave on your trip." They exchanged a look that lasted only a fraction of a second, but I saw it. It was pure panic, quickly masked. "Oh, everyone is just so busy," Mom replied smoothly, "and many of them are out-of-state investors who trust our management implicitly." Dad's phone rang again. He glanced at the screen and stood up abruptly. "I have to take this. Business never sleeps." He stepped out onto the back porch, closing the sliding glass door behind him, but I heard him just before it shut. "We need to move now. She's getting suspicious." My stomach clenched into a tight, painful knot. He was talking about me. In that single terrifying moment, any lingering sliver of doubt I had simply evaporated. My parents were con artists, and I was their next target. Mom topped off our wine glasses, chattering on about mountain property values and rental trends. Her words were just a meaningless buzz in my ears as I struggled to reconcile this smiling stranger with the woman who used to bandage my scraped knees and check for monsters under my bed. When Dad came back inside, his face was a mask of composure, but his eyes held a new, hard intensity. "Let's finish up with the paperwork, shall we? It's getting late." The contract appeared before me again, along with the elegant pen. 30 years of love and trust were balanced against a mountain of evidence of their betrayal. I couldn't pretend anymore. "Before I sign," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "can you walk me through exactly how the business operates? The complete structure?" Mom let out a light, tinkling laugh. "Darling, we've gone over this several times. The investment is secured against the physical properties." "Which properties exactly?" I pressed. "I'd like the addresses, their current valuations, and confirmation of the titles." Dad's smile tightened at the edges. "Those details are all in the prospectus. Right now, we just need your signature to secure your position." "The notary is waiting," Mom added, pointedly glancing at her watch. "We're paying her by the hour." I took a deep breath. "I checked the county records today. You don't own any properties in Aspen or Vail. The addresses you gave me are registered to completely different owners." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's smile was frozen on her face, but Dad's expression had hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. "There must be some confusion with the addresses," he said carefully. "The properties are held in an LLC for tax purposes." "Which LLC?" I shot back. "Richardson Holdings, Victoria Enterprises, or is it Carson Investments?" I watched their faces contort as I recited the aliases I had found in his office. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, knocking over her wine glass and sending a river of red across the white tablecloth. "You went through your father's things," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "Like father, like daughter, I guess," I retorted. "Apparently I learned my investigation skills from the best." Dad sat down heavily, his shoulders slumping as he exchanged a look with Mom. The entire charade had collapsed. "You don't understand how the world works, Ellie," he said, his voice suddenly cold and businesslike. "Everyone out there is trying to take advantage of you. We just learned how to beat them to the punch. By stealing from elderly neighbors? From your church friends? From your own daughter?" My voice cracked on the last word. "We prefer to call it an aggressive investment strategy," Mom replied with a shocking lack of remorse. "Nobody forces these people to invest. They throw their money at these opportunities because they're greedy for returns." "How long?" I whispered. The room starting to feel small and suffocating. "How long have you been doing this?" Dad just shrugged. 25 years. We started small after my legitimate financial practice went under. I discovered that people trust credentials and confidence a lot more than they trust verified facts. The timeline meant my entire childhood, every home we lived in, every school I attended, every family vacation, was built on a foundation of fraud, all of it funded by stolen money. "You were going to steal from me too," I said, the realization burning like acid in my throat. "Business is business," Dad said flatly. "You were always too trusting, Ellie. just like the rest of our investors. We taught you about family loyalty for a reason. It makes people predictable. Mom reached across the table, her hand hovering just inches from mine. Darling, we would have sent you something, eventually. A little token. We're not monsters. Their pathetic justifications finally broke the dam inside me. Tears streamed down my face as 30 years of memories were violently recontextualized. The parents who had comforted me, celebrated my achievements, and supported me through my divorce were the exact same people who had systematically ruined countless lives for their own profit. Everything was a lie, I choked out. Every lesson about honesty, every single family moment. It was all just part of your long con. Not everything, Mom insisted, a flicker of what looked like genuine emotion crossing her face. We do love you, Ellie, in our own way. Your way includes stealing my divorce settlement and disappearing to another country forever? Dad checked his watch impatiently. This emotional drama is completely unnecessary. You know now. You're not going to invest. End of story. It's not the end of the story, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. It's the beginning of the consequences. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know the names. I know the dates and the amounts. I know about the Millers, the Clarks, and Mrs. Gable, and I know all about your planned escape to Costa Rica. You wouldn't turn in your own parents, Mom said, but for the first time, a note of uncertainty had crept into her voice. Why not? You were planning to turn your own daughter into another one of your victims. Dad stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. You need to think very, very carefully about your next move, Eleanor. Family protects family. You stopped being my family the moment I became your next mark. I grabbed my purse and started backing toward the door. Enjoy your dinner. It might be your last home-cooked meal for a very long time. Mom scrambled to her feet, her composure finally shattering into raw panic. Ellie, wait! We can explain. There are circumstances you don't understand. But I was already fumbling with the front door, my vision blurred by tears. Behind me, I heard Dad's cold, chilling voice. Let her go. We accelerate the timeline. Tonight. I stumbled to my car and somehow managed to drive away from the house where my entire understanding of my life and family had just been completely demolished. The foundations of my world had crumbled to dust, leaving me adrift in a terrifying new reality where nothing was what it seemed. I drove aimlessly through the rainy streets of Denver, the rhythm of the windshield wipers matching the frantic pace of my thoughts. Eventually, I pulled into the vast, empty parking lot of a supermarket and called Leo. I need to see you, I managed to say between sobs. You were right. You were right about everything. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in his darkened office, the security lights of the empty law firm casting long, harsh shadows on the walls. I told him everything I had discovered, the fake identities, the list of investors, the detailed escape plans. I could have been just another name on their list, I concluded, my tears finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. They raised me for 30 years, and then they were just going to take my money and vanish. Leo's expression remained professional, but his eyes held a deep compassion. You need to understand something very important, Ellie. This is not your fault. Con artists, especially when they're your parents, are masters of manipulation. They build trust for the specific purpose of exploiting it. He opened his laptop and showed me the additional research he had done since our last call. There were articles about investment scams in other states, featuring suspects whose descriptions matched my parents perfectly, though the names were always different. Property records showing a pattern of rapid acquisitions and sales, business registrations that appeared and then vanished within months. I've already contacted a Detective Miller with the Denver PD's Financial Crimes Unit, Leo said. She's been investigating a number of similar cases and believes your parents may be connected to a much larger pattern of fraud. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Detective Miller, a sharp, focused woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every possible shade of human deception. Your parents operate what we call an affinity fraud, she explained, organizing a stack of photos and documents on the table between us. They target communities where they can establish a high level of trust: churches, neighborhood groups, professional associations. The family connection just adds another layer of perceived security for their victims. She showed me a map of 3 states, dotted with pins. Each pin represented a known victim. There were over 50 of them, many of them elderly, who had lost savings ranging from $20,000 to $500,000. Most victims never report the crime, Detective Miller continued. They feel embarrassed, or in cases involving family, they're conflicted about turning in their own relatives. Your testimony, Ellie, could be absolutely crucial in building a solid case against them. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders. If I come forward, will it help get any of that money back for those people? Potentially, she said. We have reason to believe your parents have offshore accounts. With solid evidence and international cooperation, we might be able to recover some of the assets. That afternoon, I met Helen Foster, a 78-year-old retired nurse who had invested her late husband's life insurance payout with my mother 2 years ago. $200,000. Her entire financial safety net was gone. Catherine was just so kind, Helen explained, her frail hands trembling around a teacup. She brought me meals after Harold passed away. She helped me organize all his papers. She told me she considered me family and just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. Her vulnerability was a mirror of my own. The same trust, the same devastating betrayal. But while I was young enough to rebuild my life financially, Helen was facing an uncertain future of Social Security checks and trying to find part-time work just to make ends meet. They were just so convincing, she whispered. I never once questioned their intentions. Meeting Helen solidified my resolve. This was no longer just about my own broken trust or the money I had almost lost. This was about getting justice for dozens of vulnerable people who had lost everything. What do you need me to do? I asked Detective Miller when we met again. We need recorded evidence of their scheme. Your parents are incredibly careful. They operate just below the legal radar and move on before any patterns can be established. But with your help, we could get them on record, admitting to the fraud. You want me to wear a wire, I said, the thought of facing my parents again sending a fresh wave of panic through me. It would be the most direct way to get the evidence we need, she confirmed. You would contact them, tell them you regret your reaction, and say that you've reconsidered their offer. We need you to get them talking about their operation, their past ventures, and their future plans. Leo, who had stayed by my side through the entire process, interjected. This is completely voluntary, Ellie. We can build a case in other ways, but I already knew what my answer had to be. I'll do it, tomorrow night before their flight. That evening, Detective Miller and a technical specialist walked me through the recording equipment. It was a modified cell phone that would transmit our conversation directly to a team of officers stationed nearby. We worked out a strategy. I would express interest in not just investing, but in joining their entire operation, which would hopefully prompt them to explain their methods in detail. Ask specific questions, Detective Miller advised. How do they identify their targets? How do they move the money? Where do they set up their new identities? The more details they give you, the stronger our case will be. I spent that night in a sterile hotel room, unable to go back to my own townhouse where pictures of my smiling, fraudulent parents still sat on the mantelpiece. Sleep was impossible. I wrestled with the sheer magnitude of their betrayal and the gravity of what I was about to do. These were the people who had given me life, who had shaped my values, even if it turned out those values were only meant to make me a more effective mark. By morning, a strange sense of clarity had settled over me. The parents I thought I had were illusions, carefully crafted characters in a performance that had spanned decades. My loyalty now belonged to the truth and to victims like Helen, not to the actors who had played the roles of mother and father while secretly plotting to exploit me. When Detective Miller arrived to get me ready for the operation, she found me calm and resolved. "We'll be listening in the entire time," she assured me, adjusting the small recording device. "If you feel you're in any danger, just say the phrase, 'I need to think about the timeline,' and we will intervene immediately." Leo insisted on being in the surveillance van with them. "Remember, you're not there to confront them," he reminded me, his hand on my shoulder. "You're there to gather information. Stay curious, not accusatory." As I drove toward my parents' house for the very last time, I felt my role shifting. I was no longer just a victim. I was an agent of justice. The daughter they had raised to be so trusting and loyal was about to become the instrument of their downfall. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, suitcases were already standing in the foyer, packed and ready for their business trip to Costa Rica. Mom answered the door, her face a mask of surprise. "Ellie, we didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I've been thinking about our conversation," I said, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the microphone would pick it up. "Can we talk?" Dad appeared behind her, his posture rigid with suspicion. "About what?" "About the business," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "About everything. I think I may have overreacted yesterday." They exchanged a quick, unreadable glance before Mom stepped aside. "Of course, darling. Come in." The living room showed clear signs of a hasty departure. There were empty spaces on the walls where the valuable art had once hung. Cabinet doors stood open. They had been getting ready to run. "I had a realization after I left," I began, perching on the edge of the sofa. "You've been doing this, and doing it successfully, for 25 years. There must be substantial profits involved." Dad remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. "What's your point?" "My point is, maybe I'm in the wrong business. Marketing pays the bills, but clearly not as well as whatever it is you do." I leaned forward, adopting the same pragmatic, cynical tone they had used with me the night before. So perhaps instead of just investing, I should be learning the family business. For real. The sheer shock on their faces would have been funny under any other circumstances. "You want to join us?" Mom asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Why not? Like you said, it's a dog-eat-dog world. You've obviously figured out how to master the system." Each word tasted like poison, but I kept an eager, almost admiring expression on my face. Dad sat down slowly, studying me with a new, calculating interest. "What changed your mind?" "I realized you were right about people," I said with a shrug. "They're gullible. They trust way too easily. I've been doing it my whole life, trusting friends, colleagues, Mark, and look where that got me. Divorced at 30 and starting from scratch. Meanwhile, you two have been prospering for decades." Their suspicion began to melt away, replaced by a cautious optimism. I could see the appeal for them, the prospect of keeping their daughter in their lives while continuing their criminal enterprise. It must have appealed to whatever twisted version of parental love they were capable of feeling. "It's not an easy life," Dad said, testing my commitment. "Constant movement, new identities, always looking over your shoulder. But the rewards more than compensate for the inconveniences, right?" I countered, gesturing at the luxurious furnishings around us. "Besides, 3 people working together would be more efficient than 2. Mom moved to sit beside me on the couch, taking my hand in hers. "Ellie, are you absolutely certain about this? Once you cross these lines, there's no going back to a conventional life." "I'm my parents' daughter, after all," I replied, squeezing her hand while fighting back a wave of revulsion. "So, tell me how it all really works. Everything. If I'm going to join the family business, I need to understand the entire operation." For the next hour, they laid out their entire methodology with a disturbing, almost gleeful pride. Dad explained how they chose their hunting grounds, affluent communities with tight social networks where trust could be transferred by association. Churches are absolute gold mines, he explained. Once you get the pastor or a few respected elders to invest, the rest of them follow like sheep. Everyone just assumes someone else has done the due diligence. Mom described how they built their credibility, joining civic organizations, making small public charitable donations, and befriending the most influential members of the community. "We always start with legitimate businesses as fronts," she explained. "David really was a financial advisor at first. I really did sell real estate. Those licenses and credentials provide the foundation of trust." They detailed their targeting strategy, focusing on recent widows, retirees with large savings, and busy professionals who had plenty of money but no time to do their own investment research. "The key is to make them come to you," Dad explained. "You just plant a few seeds about your own successful investments and let them ask to be included. People always value what they have to pursue more than what's freely offered to them." Most disturbingly, they detailed their exit strategies, how they slowly moved money into offshore accounts, established new identities, and vanished just before suspicions could coalesce into a full-blown investigation. "We typically net between 1 and 3 million per cycle," Dad said, as if he were discussing quarterly earnings. 4 to 5 years in one location is optimal. It's enough time to build deep trust, but not so long that patterns become obvious. "We have networks in South America," Mom added, "identities prepared years in advance. The current iteration, Catherine and David Peterson, has just about reached its expiration date." As they talked, I kept asking clarifying questions, drawing out specific examples from their past cons. They named cities, schemes, and approximate dates, all of it being transmitted directly to Detective Miller and her team. "What about people like the Millers or Mrs. Gable?" I asked. "Were they special cases?" "Jim Miller was starting to get suspicious," Dad recalled, without a hint of remorse. "He started asking about property titles. We had to accelerate our timeline and get out of Seattle 3 months ahead of schedule." "And the fire at your office just before that audit?" I prompted. "Was that an insurance fraud bonus?" He actually chuckled. "It destroyed a lot of problematic records and collected us a nice $200,000 for the building and its contents. When I felt I had gathered more than enough evidence, I gave the prearranged signal. This timeline seems a little rushed. When exactly were you planning on telling me about Costa Rica?" "After we were settled," Mom admitted. "We would have sent for you eventually. Or at least returned some of your investment," Dad added with a shrug. "A family discount." Just then, the doorbell rang. Mom frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "Actually, yes," I said, standing up as the first glimmer of realization dawned on their faces. "I brought some business associates who are very interested in your unique investment model." Detective Miller entered, followed by 4 uniformed officers, their badges displayed prominently. "Catherine and David Peterson, you are under arrest for investment fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." The transformation was instantaneous. Mom collapsed onto the couch in a storm of sobs, while Dad's face hardened into a mask of pure contempt. "You recorded us," he spat at me as an officer snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "Your own parents." "I learned from the best," I replied, my voice breaking despite my resolve. "Family first, right?" As they were led away, Mom looked back at me, tears streaming down her face. "Ellie, please, we can explain everything." But there were no explanations that could ever rebuild what they had so completely destroyed. I stood there silently and watched as the police cars carried away the 2 strangers who had raised me. The aftermath was a tidal wave. The local media seized on the story, respected community leaders revealed as serial fraudsters, exposed by their own daughter. Some reporters painted me as a hero. Others questioned how I could betray my own parents. The online comments were a toxic mix of support and accusation. Our family, friends fractured into opposing camps. Some, especially those who had lost money to my parents, expressed their profound gratitude for my courage. Others condemned me for not handling it within the family. Several of my relatives stopped speaking to me altogether, unwilling or unable to believe the mountain of evidence presented. The legal process ground forward with methodical precision. My parents hired expensive attorneys who specialized in white-collar crime. Their defense team tried to paint their activities as merely aggressive but legal investment strategies, and the victims as suffering from investors' remorse. I had to testify before the grand jury, providing context for the hours of recorded evidence. Sitting in that witness box, facing the parents who had planned to make me their final victim, took every ounce of strength I had. How could you do this to your own daughter? Dad's attorney asked me during a brutal cross-examination, trying to paint me as vindictive and scorned. That's a question you should probably direct at my parents, I replied steadily. They were planning to steal my entire life savings before disappearing from my life forever. Eventually, the prosecutors were able to locate and freeze offshore accounts containing approximately $2 million. It was only a fraction of what my parents had stolen over the decades, but it was enough to begin the process of restitution for the most recent victims. 3 months after their arrest, I visited them in the county jail. A thick pane of security glass separated us, as I faced the people who had given me life, yet had betrayed every single principle they claimed to have instilled in me. I felt a strange emptiness. "Why did you come?" Dad asked, his eyes cold and devoid of any warmth. "To understand," I replied. Was any of it real? Any single moment of my childhood? Or was I just part of the long con from the very beginning? Mom leaned forward, her palm pressed against the glass. "We love you, Ellie. That part was never fake. We have a different understanding of how to live, of how the world really works. You were going to steal from me," I reminded her, my voice flat. "Business and family are separate considerations," Dad interjected. "We always intended to make it right with you, eventually. Even then, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of years in prison, they couldn't bring themselves to speak the truth. They were still running the con. You taught me that integrity is what matters most," I said, standing up to leave. "I suppose I should thank you for that lesson, even if you never believed it yourselves." As I walked away, I heard Dad call after me. "When we get out, we can start fresh. A new venture, all 3 of us together." His words just confirmed what I already knew. They would never, ever change. The con wasn't just what they did, it was who they were. And it was time for me to forge an identity of my own, completely separate from their toxic influence. A year has passed. I relocated to Seattle, accepting a senior marketing position with a technology firm. I sold my townhouse in Denver, severing another tie to my former life. The new city offered me a welcome anonymity, a distance from the whispers and stares that had followed me after my parents' arrest. Their trial concluded with guilty verdicts on multiple counts. Dad received a 12-year sentence. Mom got 8 due to her perceived secondary role in the schemes. The judge ordered restitution payments to be made to the identified victims, though I knew most of them would only ever see cents on the dollar. My healing truly began with therapy. I found a therapist, Dr. Evans, who specialized in family betrayal trauma. She helped me understand that grieving for people who are still alive can be far more complicated than mourning the dead. "You're grieving the parents you thought you had," she explained during one of our early sessions. "The relationship you believed in never actually existed. That is a profound and complex loss. Working through my anger was the hardest part. Not just anger at my parents, but anger at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I replayed my life over and over, wondering how many victims might have been spared if I had only questioned their lifestyle, their sudden moves, their secrecy. "You were a child, Ellie, raised to trust them implicitly," Dr. Evans would gently remind me. "Children are not responsible for recognizing the criminality of their parents." Gradually, I started to channel my experience into positive action. I joined a fraud victim advocacy group and eventually found myself serving on their board. We created resources specifically for the family members of white-collar criminals, people who were struggling with the dual trauma of betrayal and social stigma. My marketing background proved to be invaluable as we developed public education campaigns about the dangers of affinity fraud. I began speaking at community centers and retirement homes, helping potential victims recognize the very same warning signs my parents had perfected over the years. Fraudsters count on your politeness, I would explain to the audiences. They expect you not to ask the hard questions or to independently verify their claims. Breaking that social contract feels uncomfortable, but it's what protects your financial future. My most meaningful connection, however, was formed with Helen Foster, the retired nurse who had lost her life savings to my mother. After the trial, I contacted each of the local victims personally, offering whatever support I could. With Helen, the relationship deepened into a genuine friendship. "You remind me of my own daughter," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "She lives in Australia now. You have the same determination in your eyes." Helen began joining me at the fraud prevention workshops, sharing her own story with a devastating and powerful honesty. Her presence was a constant reminder to our audiences that victims weren't foolish or greedy. They were just trusting individuals who were caught in a sophisticated psychological trap. We celebrated small victories together: her successful application for subsidized senior housing, my first promotion at my new job, the day she received her first restitution check for a mere $3,000, a pittance compared to what she had lost, but symbolically significant. "Your parents took my money," Helen told me once, "but through you, I've gained something far more valuable, a purpose in my final years." Moments like that helped me rebuild my faith in human connection. I started to develop new friendships in Seattle, approaching them with a careful but open heart. Trust came much more slowly for me now, but when I did give it, it was more meaningful because it was deliberately chosen, not automatically granted. Daniel, a graphic designer I met through volunteer work, became particularly important in my healing. When I finally found the courage to share my full story with him, his response was simple and profound. "That shaped you," he said, "but it doesn't define you." 6 months into our relationship, I received a letter from my mother in prison. Her elegant, familiar handwriting filled page after page with nostalgic reminiscences about my childhood, flowery declarations of maternal love, and subtle, manipulative suggestions that I could help secure her early parole if I testified about her positive parenting. Daniel found me crying at my kitchen table, the letter crumpled into a ball beside me. "She still thinks I'm a potential mark," I explained through my tears. "What are you going to do?" he asked, not advising, just offering his quiet support. After a long period of consideration, I wrote back a single paragraph. "I am building a life based on genuine connections and integrity. When you are ready to speak the truth without any manipulation, I will listen. Until then, I wish you healing and self-reflection during your incarceration." It was the last communication we ever exchanged. Dad never wrote at all. By the second anniversary of their arrest, I had established a new definition of family, one based on chosen connections rather than blood relations. My support network included Daniel, Helen, my colleagues from the advocacy group, and the friends who had stood by me through my darkest days. "Family is not defined by DNA," I explained to a support group for the children of incarcerated parents. "Family is made up of the people who nurture your authentic self, who value your well-being above their own personal gain, and who demonstrate their love through actions, not just words." The deepest lesson that has emerged from my experience is complex, but clarifying. Integrity matters more than blood ties or misplaced loyalty, especially when family itself becomes predatory. I no longer blame myself for turning in my parents. Their actions had forced me into an impossible choice, and I had chosen justice for the vulnerable over protection for those who had systematically violated that trust. "The greatest freedom," I wrote in my journal on the second anniversary of their arrest, "is building a life that is anchored in truth, rather than in comforting illusions." The family mythology I had cherished for so long was beautiful, but it was hollow. The reality I live in now is imperfect and sometimes painful, but it is authentic. It provides a foundation for genuine connection that was impossible in the shadow of their lies. This understanding hasn't eliminated the difficult days. The holidays bring a painful awareness of the traditional family gatherings I no longer have. Certain songs or smells can trigger a flood of memories of moments that felt so genuine at the time, but are now tainted by the truth of their deception. Yet, increasingly, a sense of peace is replacing the bitterness. I've come to recognize that despite their moral bankruptcy, my parents unintentionally gave me valuable gifts, resilience, a deep empathy for victims, and an unwavering commitment to honesty. "We can't choose our origin stories," I told Daniel as we decorated our first Christmas tree together, "but we can choose what legacy we carry forward and what we decide to leave behind. The parents who raised me chose deception as their life's path. I choose transparency. They prioritized material gain over human connection. I prioritize integrity in my relationships. They saw vulnerability as an opportunity for exploitation. I see it as the foundation for genuine trust. Every day represents another brick in the foundation of the life I am building for myself, one where promises are kept, trust is sacred, and connections are authentic. The betrayal that nearly destroyed me has, instead, become the catalyst for creating a more meaningful existence than I might otherwise have ever known." Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone close to you broke your trust completely? How did you find the strength to start over? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and redemption. Remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, only by the integrity with which you face life's challenges. Thank you for witnessing my story. End of story.